Have you ever had a life lesson hit you right between the eyes when you're doing something that you do every single day, but out of nowhere pops the lesson? This is Tad Fulford with Rise Up in Real Estate, and that happened to me this past week, and I want to share the lesson with you. So I used to do a lot of long distance cycling. Believe it or not, we had an organization back in the day that would take groups of teenagers on long distance bicycle rides. Like we actually went from Charleston, South Carolina to Charlotte, North Carolina. We drove through the Shenandoah Valley, the mountains of Virginia. We actually rode the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and we drove all the way from South Carolina down to Florida. We would take these long bike trips to try to teach life lessons to teenagers. Along the way, us adults learned a lot of life lessons. And believe it or not, just the other day, I learned a life lesson from something that I did 20 or 30 years ago. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I want to share that lesson with you. So as we did these long distance cycles, we would go for weeks at a time. And in that period, we would ride during the day and we would stay at a different church at night and host a program for the teenagers in that church. Our teenagers would talk to their teenagers about the lessons they had learned that day on the bicycle, about pain that they had overcome, accidents that they had had, obstacles that they had seen, heat that they had endured, cold or wind that they had faced. They would teach the teenagers at that church who were hosting us with meals and a place to sleep their daily lessons. One of the things that I learned just a few days ago, though, was what I learned while I was riding my bike. You can imagine these teenagers had never done this kind of a trip before. They had never ridden a bike more than just around their neighborhood, and we were asking them to ride 40, 50, 60 miles per day. As they rode these long journeys, they learned tons of lessons. And here's one that I learned. We did this one cycle up a mount called Mount Altus in the mountains of Virginia, I believe, or West Virginia. And it was a pretty steep incline. And as we faced this incline, as you can imagine, we were all a little bit nervous. Now, we were riding top of the line bicycles that had gears, the best equipment. But I learned something about climbing a mountain that I can relate to my life. As we approached the hill, I recognized and I realized over time, doing this day in and day out, that if I focused on the steepness of the hill, I would be defeated. If I rode with my countenance and my look focused at the top of the hill, I would be defeated. What I had to do over time is learn to focus on my legs and my stroke to get to the top of the hill. When we approached the bottom of the hill, the first couple of times we did this, you can imagine the teenager would see this and they would be awestruck with the climb and nervous and scared and switching gears and trying to make sure that everything went perfectly. And they were looking at how big the mountain was. But I would often call out to them, focus on your thighs. And what I had to do to make it, even myself, which I was a pretty good athlete back then and had ridden hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles on my bicycle, I knew that it was going to be hard for me, but this is how I broke it down. I would focus on the motion of my legs. I would keep my countenance down. I would focus on my thighs first in pushing my pedals. And when that got too much for me, then I would focus on my calves and pulling at my pedals for a minute until that got too tiring. Then I'd focus back on my thighs again, pushing, and then I would pull, and then I would push, and I would almost count to myself and do the small things. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? Do the small things well before I knew it. If I looked up, I was halfway up the hill. Again, focus down, focus on the small things, the things that I can control, focus on the change when I felt the pain, and then I would look up and I'd be at the top of the mountain. And this lesson that I learned from cycling taught teenagers a lot about overcoming of adversity and facing obstacles. And I want to share with you today that the thing that I want you to take away from this video is if you have a large problem ahead of you, or you're setting a huge goal, or you've got something in your life that you must overcome, don't focus on conquering that big goal at one time. Don't even look at the big goal. Look at the daily tasks, the minute by minute things that you need to do in order to overcome that adversity. David even did this with Goliath in the biblical story. If he would have looked at the size of the giant, if we would only focused on how overmatched he was, he would have been defeated. But what did David focus on? David focused on the things that he was gifted and skilled at. The slingshot and the rock, focused on the small things, being accurate with what he knew he could take care of, and he conquered the big adversity. I want you to do the same thing in your life. Figure out what the small things are that you can focus on and control day to day in order to overcome the big hill in your life. This is Tad Fulford with Rise Up in Real Estate, and I hope this video and this thought helps you rise up.